Okay, I got the red smoke.
Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby. Give it to me. I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Full Auto Friday, round number 4. You know the rules. I know the rules. Rapid fire Q&A. 5 questions in front of me. And I'm probably going to deviate from the rules on the first one because it's I don't want to say complicated or a complex answer. Maybe it's both of those. It just might take me a little bit more than 5 minutes to work my way through that. But before I get into it, thank you to the people who've reached out and said that, I'll paraphrase, the audio was fucked on the last Full Auto Friday. And it might have happened on one of the other videos. And the reason for it, this should be no surprise to anybody, is that I pushed the wrong button on the editing software, specifically Adobe Audition, and I applied or activated an effect that increased the sound and decreased some of the other sounds. So I figured out where that was, and hopefully the audio experience on this is better. Let's get the phone ready. 5 minutes. 5 minutes at a time. I'm going to go airplane mode. I should have done this before, but I forgot to, so stand by. Stopwatch. Ready? Let us begin. Now, this question comes from Mark Vu, and I'm going to answer the first part of this question and the third part of this question. The second part I'm going to leave until the last question for this episode of Full Auto Friday. Mark's question. To date, you have mostly been in your comfort zone. I would love to see you reach. Please comment on George Floyd. Why there are so few black men, women, gay SEALs, etc., etc. I've been hit up many times. There's no X in etc. Uncomfortable question mark? Go for it. With respect. Well, I almost started answering your question without the stopwatch. Boom, we're off and running. Mr. Vu, what I can say is this. First off, when it comes to your topics, there's really nothing that I am uncomfortable speaking about. I have some guidelines for myself, and they would probably be, I'm not going to talk about specifics of my children's life because that's not fair to them, and I want them to have their privacy, and I won't talk about the details of my divorce because each side of that equation deserves a voice. And unless we were able to sit down and actually have a discussion about it, you would only be hearing my side. So I refuse to participate in those two topics. Other than that, I will answer just about anything. And for people who know me, you know that that is the case. So let's start at the top. Please comment on George Floyd. As I am recording this, this is Tuesday or Wednesday. This is Tuesday. This is going to come out on Friday. The United States is still in the absolute throes of dealing with what happened to Mr. Floyd. And I have had more than a few people reach out to me with messages saying, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you getting involved? Why aren't you making a statement? And my answer to that is that I don't know what to say. I view what happened to Mr. Floyd as murder. He was killed by another human being. I don't think there's any other way to look at that situation. And the medical examiner reports, of which there have been 2, and I believe they were actually released today, they both agree on that point. And people have begun to start talking about, well, what about the other things that were in his system? Irrelevant. It doesn't matter. That doesn't change what happened to that human being. It was incredibly gut-wrenching and difficult to watch, and nothing like that should never happen. That situation, the possibility for that, I wish that it didn't exist. When it comes to the police officer, or in this case, the police officers that were involved in that situation, all I can say is that of all the law enforcement officers that I know, and I know quite a few law enforcement officers, of all of them that I know, not a single one has even for a moment voiced anything other than disgust with what happened in that situation. And one of the main reasons that I don't often, or it's not that I don't often, one of the main reasons that I don't feel comfortable when I talk about, or when I'm asked about reforming the police, is that I've never been a police officer. And if you look at that situation, it would appear from many angles as if race played a large issue. But if you take a slightly broader optic, there were 4 different ethnicities present of the officers that were involved in that situation. And I'm going to tangent off here for a second. In my mind, and in my opinion, which is all that this counts for, each of those 4 officers should be charged with exactly the same thing that the officer who had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck is eventually charged and prosecuted with. And I say that because any one of them could have stopped that situation from escalating to what it became. And not only could they, I feel like they should have, and I feel like they are obligated to. If you want to wear a badge for a living, you have to shoulder the responsibility that comes with it. They were not 4 rookie police officers. They should have had the experience, the situational awareness to understand what is going on. And I, to a degree, and I can tie this a little bit back into my old job, have an understanding of the difficulty of pulling somebody back and saying, hey man, you're making a mistake. And the risk is, especially if you're in a community that is similar, you wear the same uniform or you wear a badge, or it's looked at perhaps as it's an inspirational or an aspirational, or a community of people that might have power over other people. The risk is, in doing so, you might create an embarrassment for yourself, the people you're with, and the entire organization or community that wears that uniform or badge. In the short term, perhaps, but in the long term, in my opinion, stepping up and doing the right thing is actually the way that you close the gap in trust and elevate and maintain the integrity of an organization. And those officers knew that, and they had the chance to step in, and they didn't. And like I said, in my opinion, they should all 4 be charged exactly the same. Now, that's my opinion. I don't think that's how the law works, but that's how I personally feel about those 4 officers. So I don't know how to comment on institutional racism when it comes to law enforcement or our society in general. So what I'm trying to do is listen to other people who are talking about that, because I don't understand it, and I don't personally feel it, but that doesn't mean that others don't, and it's not true. That's just my own personal feelings. And all of this tied together is why I'm not vocal on some topics. I don't feel like I have any space or reason to enter into that void, because I have nothing to offer. And I would rather listen, and hopefully I can inform my opinions and my beliefs. Like I said, all 4 of those officers had different ethnicities. That doesn't prevent racism, obviously. Could it have been racially driven? I don't know. Is there a systematic problem with racism inside of law enforcement? I don't know. And I think the biggest takeaway from this for me is that if law enforcement is going to repair their image or close the gap, like Greg was talking about when he came on 2 episodes ago, close the gap in public trust, the burden of that falls on law enforcement. And I say that because there is a small parallel between the law enforcement community and the community of people that I came from. So in the SEAL community, if I were to line everybody up and I put everybody in a uniform and I were to say to you, I need you to pick out the bad apples, you would fail completely, because from an outward perspective, everybody looks the same. But inside of the SEAL community, every single person who is in the community knows that there are bad apples, period. Because no selection process is perfect. No selection process is complete. It's anything but a secret that there are pieces of shit inside of the SEAL community and every other community. But the only people that can really go in with a level of precision and accuracy and remove that cancer are those from inside of the community. The law enforcement community is exactly the same way. I couldn't tell you by looking at a police officer if he's a good officer or a bad officer, or if he has a history of phenomenal civilian interactions or abuse of power and force. I don't know. But I know that the people that work with him have an understanding of that the leadership above them probably has an understanding of that. And the only really efficient and effective way that problem is going to correct itself is if it comes internally. And that's going to take time. And this is one of the things that I'm worried about the most. There's going to be other incidents where people lose their life between now and when we arrive, hopefully, at a better place when it comes to how the civilian populace that police serve and the police themselves view and interact with each other. It's going to happen. I mean, I wish I could say it's not going to, but people are going to die in police custody again. And I look at what's going on in the United States, and the fucking U.S. is literally and metaphorically on fire in quite a few areas. And I have an understanding to a degree of pent-up frustration and anger, and I do think that there was preloaded pressure from people who were upset and felt pushed into a corner from the restrictive guidelines of the COVID era that most of us are slowly being allowing to be relaxed. But I think that initial pressure combined with the situation that occurred with George Floyd, it created the perfect tinderbox. And I see people who are out there and they just want to burn it to the ground. And I'm not going to say I understand that desire, but I can understand the anger and the frustration. I do understand that. But I certainly hope that people who are out there striking matches because all they want is that for the current system to be destroyed, that I hope you show that same level of passion and commitment and enthusiasm to building the system back up. Because, you see people or hear people talking about, oh, it's the young people who are out there and they want to recreate the system. Okay, well, you need to have a hand in that recreation because you're going to inherit the system that you are currently right now destroying. And I don't understand the looting, and I don't understand how random destruction of the cities and places that you live, I don't see how those are connected to the message that you're trying to get across, but I'm not living in your shoes. So I guess the super long-winded, I was supposed to limit myself to 5 minutes, but I'm now at 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Those are all the reasons why I haven't come out and tried to make a statement. I have no statement that I can make that comes from an educated perspective of what's happened, of what's going to happen in the future. I hate to see this country from the outside perspective looking like it's tearing itself apart, and I don't know what to do. And sometimes I think the best thing that you can do is just take a knee and get a better understanding of the environment that you are in and try to make educated choices and decisions. And that's what I'm trying to do. Mr. Floyd got murdered straight up, and that's horrendous. And I wish, again, personally, that the people involved in that would have to suffer the same consequences as Mr. Floyd did. Oh, and by the way, I'd volunteer to be the person that applies that pressure to them. But that's not how it works. So I wish I had a better answer. I am not uncomfortable talking about that issue whatsoever or at all. I just don't know how I could have an impact on what is going on. I think the best thing that I can do is listen and then try to integrate what I learn into who I am moving forward. The second part of this question was, why are there so few women and gay SEALs? First off, there might be a bunch of gay SEALs. I have no idea. I could give a shit about somebody's sexuality. I'm sure there are gay SEALs. I hope. Well, yeah, I hope there are gay SEALs. It didn't come up much. I can't think of anybody that I know directly that was at least open about being gay. And I can't think of anybody, a single person that I served with throughout 17 years, that if they would have told me that they were gay, that I would have given a shit about. So, and then on the women's side of the house, women have only been, the program, not women, the program itself has only been open to women applicants for, I believe, and I might be slightly off on this statistic, for about 5 years. It might be maybe 7. I think closer to 5 than 7, but with my luck, it's probably 6. So that's going to obviously limit the number of women SEALs. And right now, the program is open and available to them until there is a woman that can meet the standards and graduate the program. There are not going to be any female SEALs. And that's just the way that it is. The standard is what it is. It's not based off of gender, race, ethnicity, belief, fill in the blank. It's based off of you rise to or exceed the standard, or you are not going to make entry into this community. And I'll get a little bit more into that when I answer the 5th question. Because guess what? I'm a little bit over my time here. 13 minutes for question number 1. All right, let's get back on track. Question number 2. This comes from Luis Pellegrino 3. I'm sure you get a bunch of these. I've never been a gun owner, but with the unrest in my area, I'm wanting to buy a gun for home protection. Do you have any recommendations? Brand, caliber? ? I hope to hear from you. Side note, love the content you provide. One prime spot in today's media for me. All right, on to the question. I do get a bunch of questions from people who ask me about gun ownership. And I'm glad that you prefaced this with your desire to purchase a firearm is driven by what's going on around you. And what I'm going to say to you is you're probably a little bit behind the power curve when it comes to preparation. Because if you go out and buy a gun, and I don't know where you live, let's say you live, as an example, in California. When I left there, it was a minimum 10-day wait. So regardless of the unrest going on around you and how much you feel like you may need a gun, 10 days from now, if you were to go in today, you will actually be able to go in and get that gun. Now, will the possession of a firearm in your house make you safer? In my personal opinion, the answer is maybe. And that maybe is determined on how you view the weapon that you now possess. If you view it as something that should, because of what it is designed to do, demands currency, competency, and training, probably in the reverse order, training, currency, and competency, then you're going to go down the rabbit hole of taking the time that you need to get in range time and instruction. You're going to learn the mechanics of your weapon. You're going to know how to take it apart. You're going to know how to clean it, care for it, and you're also going to understand that it has to be stored safely. So you're going to need to get somewhere to put this gun so when you do not have it physically in your positive possession, nobody else has the ability to access it either. All of those things take time. If you don't view it like that, and you think that the possession of a gun is a flick of a light switch, where before your house was a dangerous place, or it was, I should say, it was at risk because you didn't have a gun, but now you think it is safe and protected because you do, and the only difference was you flick a light switch because you didn't own a gun and now you do, I would say no, it doesn't make you any safer. And the reason for it is it's just a tool. And just like any other tool, if you don't take the time to learn how to use it, it's the weapon itself, the tool itself is going to be limited by the person holding it. So possession of a gun by an individual that either doesn't know how to use it or is not mentally or emotionally prepared to use it to take another human being's life, in my opinion, makes that owner more of a danger to themselves and those around them than it does provide safety and protection. So you need to think about why you want this gun and what you think it's going to provide for you. Because what it's going to provide for you will largely be determined by how much time, energy, and effort you are willing to put in to be proficient, which is where I said you're a little behind the power curve, because the time to do that is before you feel threatened, not after. Now, when it comes to brand and caliber, I would recommend you not seek a weapon purchase with a brand or caliber in mind. If you have something that a friend of yours, or they're like over the top, they love it, and they demand that you go try it, then go do that by all means. When people ask me about guns, what I recommend is they go to a place that sells guns, or a place where they can try a bunch of guns and pick up a bunch and put them in their hand. For me, it starts not with caliber, it starts with your comfort level in handling it, how it feels in your hand, and potentially how comfortable it is for you on where you want to carry it, whether that be a holster in a purse, an appendix holster, a hip holster. All of those things are important. And if it's not comfortable, you're not going to want to have it on you, regardless of how much protection you think it might provide. So find something that's comfortable in your hand. Maybe that's a Glock, maybe that's a SIG, maybe it's an H&K. I don't know. The number of options available out there are aplenty. Go mess around with them and then start shooting on that platform and mess around with the different calibers of ammunition. They're going to feel different in your hand. They are going to have a different recoil for you to manage. Some are going to be louder than others. Mess around with them and figure out the one that you are the most comfortable with. And the last potentially piece of advice that I'll give you is that there are certain types of ammunition that are more readily sourceable than others. 9mm and 45 are pretty standard in the U.S. You're going to find both pretty much anywhere. People who like 40s, people who like 10mm, and I can't even keep up with the number of the calibers of pistol cartridges. If you find one that's a little fringish, you just expect that finding the ammo might be a little bit more difficult depending on where you go or supply and demand. So, food for thought. Hopefully that helps you make a decision, and hopefully whatever decision you go with, you dedicate that time, energy, and effort. Boom. Question 2. We're back on track. Question 3. Oh, God, I don't know how to say this name. Juhar Singh. If I said that wrong, I am sorry. Hey, Andy, I really enjoy your podcast. Here's a potential Full Auto Friday question. How do you keep your world small when you want to have a large, in parentheses, perhaps global, impact on people? And are there any times that having a bigger world perspective is beneficial? Thanks. Okay. I think a lot of people are hearing, I know I've spoken about this before. This should come as no surprise or shock to anybody, but Rogan has a bigger platform than I do and a larger audience. And the last time I was on there, we were talking about, I was actually specifically to do with the COVID situation we're working our way through. But I was talking about keeping your world small. And I was doing that specifically in the context of achieving your goals or trying not to be overwhelmed by everything that's going on around you. I think that a world perspective is very beneficial. So I don't want people to confuse what I'm saying. I am not saying bury your head in the sand and only live your life at a microscopic level. That's the opposite of the point that I was trying to get across. So a world and global perspective is great because that'll let you know where you might interface into that or how you want to navigate the things that are going on in that larger environment. Once you determine where you want to go, or you determine a goal that you want to have, and perhaps that is a global impact, as you mentioned in the parentheses, now you have your starting point and then you have an end point. So everything in between is the variable. Success and failure is obviously a variable, but for the purpose of this, what I'm talking about are the sequential steps that you're going to need to make to get from where you are to where you want to be. You lay that out, and the point that I was trying to make is the most impactful tool that I have found to not become overwhelmed is to focus on the next step that I need to take as opposed to the distance from where I am to where I want to be, especially if that distance is massive. Maybe use weight loss as an example. If you're listening to this and let's say you're 100 pounds overweight, if not more, and you lose a pound and you can only think about the 99 pounds more that you need to lose, I've seen it time and time again. People get overwhelmed, they get frustrated, they feel like the weight of the world is on their shoulders, that there's no chance that they're going to be able to, successfully lose those other 99 pounds, and they give up. In that perspective of achieving a goal, focus on the 1 pound in front of you to the next pound, to the next pound, to the next pound, and only focus on achieving that small success so you can build momentum, and that momentum can take you to a greater goal. But at no point in time should you lose sight of the bigger picture, right? You need to lift your head up, and I'm going to give a ratio that is going to change per person, and it's going to change depending on the amount of momentum that you have. I'm going to say 80-20. 80% of the time, keep your head down and look when it comes to goal setting on the next step that you need to accomplish. But every once in a while, pick your head up and still reorient yourself to where you are, because you may need to shift your goal. Especially, to go back to this question, if you're talking about a global impact or a world perspective, you have to keep an eye on that as well. And the goal that you set right now may not be an applicable goal in 2 or 3 months, even though you are 3/4 of the way down that path. That's totally fine. You can make adjustments on that path, but the only way that you're going to be able to do that is if you lift your head up occasionally. So perhaps this question is driven more in my lack of ability to articulate the concept or put some parameters on what I actually meant to that concept, because it's a combination of the two. To avoid getting overwhelmed by the macro, you can focus on the micro, but at no point in time should you completely ignore that macro in its totality. And hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that answers your question. 2 more. This one comes from KW Kaizen. Hey, Andy, would love to get your thoughts either here or on Full Auto Friday. I saw an article today that was talking about changing police in the sense of creating more specialists that would respond to calls as needed. A mental health crisis would activate a psychologist or licensed crisis manager. An overdose would send emergency health personnel, and so on. I'm concerned about the defund the police movement, as I agree that police need more training. But this new take might actually be better. Thoughts? How did that play out in the teams, positively or negatively? Having a medic, breacher, sniper, etc., as opposed to everyone doing everything. Chris. I would describe a SEAL as somebody who is a jack of all trades and a master of none. So we did have medics that specifically went to additional training, and a lot of additional training. We did have breachers that, again, went to additional training, sniper, additional training. We had communicators as well. And the abilities that those individuals had was very impressive. But you can't always rely on having that one person there. And that would be the only issue that I would see when it comes to creating more specialists to respond to calls as needed. I think having a mental health specialist at every, a psychologist or a crisis manager at every mental health associated call would be great. But I don't know if the manpower actually exists to be able to send a specialist to each and every one of those. Just like if you're tasked when you have, call it 32 guys, so 2 platoons worth of SEALs, and they say you need to take down an apartment structure or an apartment complex that has stairways, hallways, doors, both external and internal. There's no way that a breacher can come to every single one of the breaching problems, which is why we have people that specialize in breaching, but everybody else who is on that team has at least an operational knowledge of breaching. Are they going to understand the calculations or have the ability to create and place a nuanced explosive charge that will have the maximum amount of efficiency with the minimum amount of risk and exposure on the other side of the door? No, they're not going to be able to. Are they going to have an understanding, though, of how to mechanically open a door, maybe with a sledge, a hoolie, or a shotgun? Yes, they are going to. Why is that? Because sometimes you need to get the fuck out of the hallway. And if you're standing there waiting for a breacher, you might end up getting yourself killed. And I would rather see somebody responding to a mental health crisis that has a baseline level of training and hopefully save somebody's life than have them be resistant to engage that individual, waiting for a specialist and have that person take their life. So I think that life and occupations like being a SEAL or being in law enforcement, they actually reward the generalist a little bit more than the specialist. I'm not saying there's not a role for a specialist, because if you encounter a problem and the specialist is there, the result is, of course, likely going to be better. But I don't know how many times, every time that we would create a plan for any type of operation, we're looking at mutually supporting positions, and we need to make sure that each one of those positions has an equal level of skill set, the ability to communicate, shoot at long distance, talk on the radio, and eventually you run out of people who that's their specialty. So it becomes their secondary, tertiary skill. And you just have to keep that in mind. If there's no way that there could be enough specialists created to respond in the manner that I think that you were talking about. However, I think that these organizations should strive at all times to consistently be elevating the knowledge and capability level of the people that are working for them to the best of their ability. And I'll tell you right now, that's struggling, because you'll work on perhaps maybe your mental health skills, but then the next thing you know, your breaching skills is falling off, and then your medical skill is falling off. So it's this constant paradigm. Actually, I don't know if that's the right word. It's this constant cycle of chasing your currency, and that actually lasts throughout a career. I'm not really aware of the defund the police movement. I think that's the exact opposite direction that it should be going if people are talking about that. If you think that they're operating in a contentious and strained environment right now, if you pull their funding, it's only going to get worse, in my opinion. So hopefully that answered your question. It's specialists are great. Unless, maybe think of it this way. Being a flathead screwdriver is awesome if you encounter a screw that's a flathead. It's not as good when you have a Phillips head. You might be able to jam that thing in there, but it really sucks when you need to hammer a nail into a wall. So you might be better off with something that can do a little bit of all of that. And I think that would actually set those people that work in this career field on a path of continually educating themselves, and hopefully throughout that journey of a career getting better and better, being able to pass that on to the people who are coming up underneath them. That's my thought process on it. Last question. This comes from one Jonah Cohen, and it ties back into the first question, which is why I avoided the second portion of the first question. Is there a lack of diversity in SEALs or other special forces? I believe I saw somewhere that David Goggins attributed this to bone density. Part 2. Without changing standards, are we, in parentheses, the U.S., fully leveraging our human capital potential? So, I can only speak for the SEAL community. And when you write out SEALs, it's capital S-E-A-L, lowercase s. Very common mistake. I have peripheral exposure to other special operations communities, so that would be a question you would have to ask them. In the SEAL community, and I'm going to go back to the initial question about from Mark View, why fewer black men pursue the career and other ethnicities. I actually don't think that fewer black men or other ethnicities pursue the career at a statistically lower rate. I look at my own BUDS class. There were 2 black guys in my BUDS class. There was a Hispanic guy in my BUDS class. There was a fucking murderer in my BUDS class. And if I thought about it, there was a Puerto Rican in my BUDS class. And by the way, we graduated 18 of the original class members. So I'm not expert on the ratio of ethnicity in our society, but I don't think it's not a program that selects for ethnicity. It's a program that selects for a standard. And this is the conversation that I think is important when I talk about diversity or the standard. The bottom part of your question here, without changing standards, are we fully leveraging our human capital potential? I don't know. Because would the SEAL community be more capable if we diversified it for the sake of diversification? In my opinion, the answer is no. Because the SEAL community is not tested against diversification. The SEAL community is designed and operates around being tested on the battlefield. And the battlefield really doesn't care whether or not you are diverse. When you have a piece of metal flying at your face at thousands of feet per second, it doesn't change course because of your skin color, your sex, or any belief structure that you have. And the environment that the SEAL community and other special operations communities work in is one in which you can absolutely lose your life. So the standard has to be set by the environment you are going to be tested in. Now, I completely believe in diversity of ideas. I believe that diversity of background is critically important, but it's only important to the level at which you can achieve the standard. If we were to increase the diversity, like I said, for diversity's sake, and we were to decrease the lethality or the survivability on a battlefield, we would not only be doing the SEAL community a disservice, but every member of that community and the nation with which that community actually serves. I have no idea if David Goggins attributed that to bone density, and I'm going to say he probably meant specifically black men attending the program. I don't know anything about that. I don't think that bone density would have anything to do with that, but I think that the SEAL community is a slice of the United States when it comes to the ethnic diversity. I serve with every single belief structure, men and women, race, religion. I can't think of one that wasn't represented at any given time. And I'll be honest, I never once thought about it. I never once cared at all about the color or belief of the person next to me. And the best example that I can give you of that, and I think maybe this is something good to end on, the power and how little I cared about those things. When you're overseas and somebody gets killed, they'll do what's called a ramp ceremony. And specifically in Bagram when I was there, they will, in a very ceremonial manner, transport the body from the medical facility that it was being treated at or the morgue to the ramp of the aircraft. And the streets are lined with people in uniform, men and women of every belief and every color in uniform, paying their respect to the individual that is being transferred from that medical facility to the ramp of an aircraft in a flag-draped coffin. And the number of times that I have participated or attended in one of those ceremonies and thought in my head, I wonder what color skin that person had underneath the coffin or underneath the flag. I wonder if that person under that flag was a Democrat or a Republican. I wonder what that person would think about something that I consider to be important. The number of times that I have thought about any of those things is absolutely and precisely fucking zero, because it doesn't matter. And I don't care. And I'm getting a little bit off topic with your answer, but you care more about what you're there for and the people to your left and right. You care about the similarities, not the differences. And the standards of the battlefield don't give a shit about the belief, political affiliation, or the color of the person that's underneath that flag. And that's what you have to prepare yourself for. I think that the SEAL community is incredibly diverse. I think the special operations community is incredibly diverse. If they can find a way to increase the diversity without decreasing the standard, I'd support it 100%. As long as everything is based in the standards that the battlefield present. The second that you move away from that and replace that word standards with something else, I think that we are on a path to somewhere that we don't want to go, because the results are not going to be what we want them to be. And that's all I got for this week, Full Auto Friday. If you got questions, send them to me however the hell you want to. You can do with an email or Instagram DM. Surprise me. Surprise yourself. And that's all for this week.